Want to go into backgrounds really quick. We'll go into John's, I guess, if you want to go first.
Hi, everyone. Like my colleagues, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been involved both investing in companies and starting companies. On the side, though, I've developed a real passion for social impact, where not only do you use entrepreneurial skills to create revenue streams, but you also create some social good from it. And I've been fortunate to be part of judging panels in social impact projects, plus speaking at various conferences, and have noticed there's a huge movement. And in fact, I just briefly mentioned that when I was in business school, I would say only about 10% of my class had a real interest in social impact stuff, where now 80% of business school classes have a real interest. In fact, Armando's school, MIT, is a leader of that. It's kind of hard to go and finish a school like MIT today and not have been involved in one or two projects that have a social impact. So I'll take it. Well, why don't you take it from there, Armando?
Sure. So Armando Viteri, kind of as John mentioned, my university background was at MIT. I was a double E computer science guy back at MIT. However, pretty early on in my career, I wound up getting involved in entrepreneurship. I was involved in as one of the very early people in the second fastest company ever reached the Fortune 500 in American corporate history. Got another company where we went public from first revenue to an IPO in only 22 months. And certainly because of those two initial very positive experiences in entrepreneurship, I've been focused on entrepreneurship in one way or another ever since then. Earlier in my career, more as an operator, as a founder, et cetera. Later in my career as a board member, advisor, and as an investor in companies. Currently, I'm a partner in a boutique private equity firm and also CEO of two of the portfolio companies within that private equity firm. And about 4 years ago, I founded with Alicia a company by the name of 33 North Partners, which specifically focuses on helping very early stage technology companies get their company strategy aligned, and then in turn wind up getting them funded and launched as companies. So a lot of what you're going to see today in the slides are things that Alicia and I work with companies every day.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. My own background is I started a marketing company 12 years ago. I did a combination of social media, digital marketing, and traditional based marketing methods combined with PR. So at that time, no one was really doing that. I was pretty successful. I did consumer brands, e-commerce. I specialized in health and fitness and nutrition for a bit. And I ended up hearing about the MIT Enterprise Forum of Phoenix, which is a nonprofit global organization looking to further both technology and entrepreneurism in their respective cities. So I joined on and quickly got promoted to executive director because I just had a bunch of ideas around how a 501c3 could actually affect change on a greater scale than really anyone else, simply because they didn't need an immediate ROI. We could do long-term economic development programs that nobody else really had the bandwidth to do. So I instituted 5 new programs, and 3 of them were capital formation programs. That's actually the genesis of 33 North Partners and how we got started in trying to connect investors to early seed stage technology companies here in Arizona that were looking for funding. But we realized that, you know, you kind of need experienced mentors who have been there and done that before to give you advice along the way, just to keep you from making rookie mistakes that almost everybody makes but could sink your company. So that's really what we've been doing, as you said, advising early stage technology companies on raising capital and fundable company strategies. So again, just for the people who have recently joined, if you have questions, just throw them in the chat. We'll try and get to them as we're going along. And this workshop in particular is going to be more focused on a traditional company, gaining revenues for a company. Later in the week, or starting next week, we will have some workshops on problems that people with special needs or disabilities face. This exercise will probably help the company or the teams here that don't have an idea for a company or nonprofit yet to better understand the issues that are facing, the people with special needs and disabilities and their families. We'll also have some on collaborative partnerships, and we will also have one on the company strategy focus solely around nonprofits and social impact causes. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Armando, if you want to put the slides up.
Sure. Okay. So again, what we're going to do here is that we're going to walk through what are the fundamental sections of a business plan outline and what should be contained within them. So one of the things I would encourage you guys to do, it is almost impossible for people that are deep into any kind of domain to avoid jargon. And Alicia and I and John are culpable of that as anyone else. So we're going to be using jargon as we go through here. Please go to the chat and just type in, geez, what does that word mean? Right? Already I've used the term private equity. That's a pretty big term, pretty big concept. Lots of jargon in this. Catch us as we do it. We are not aware as we do it. So you guys will police us to make sure that we define things as we go. So first I wanted to kind of point out the fact that it is really easy to make the fundamentals of a viable business seem really complicated. And at the end, it's not. The concept is actually pretty simple. The implementation is really hard. The concept is as simple as, look, you have an idea for a product that solves a compelling need. Can you identify a target economic buyer? In other words, somebody who would actually write you a check for that thing. Do you know how to get to that target economic buyer? Do you know how to get your message to that person? And finally, is the market large enough to actually sustain a viable business? Right? So 4 things. Those simple 4 things, boy, really hard to be able to pick the right idea and then to execute it well, get it funded, do all the other piece parts. We're in this presentation, we're going to try and get through the piece parts. So first thing about business plan, we're going to do a similar presentation when we get to the PowerPoint section, talking about how you develop a pitch deck as different from a business plan, but they should follow exactly the same format and have exactly the same concepts. The business plan and the pitch deck should be exactly mirror images of each other, with the one exception that the business plan is used for a different audience and therefore contains a very different level of detail. In general, a business plan is a long form, way to oversimplify, it is a long form pitch deck. But the audience for it is really internal to the company. And in that, what I mean by that is typically outsiders, customers, investors are not going to read the business plan. It's really used for within your own staff, your core team, being able to go into a great deal of detail in each of the important areas, like what the product is, like how am I going to get to market, what is my revenue model. In a pitch deck, that each of these huge concepts is boiled down to 1 slide and maybe 50 words. In a business plan, you take the time to actually think through it carefully in a written out section. And doing that in that kind of detail is a great exercise for your entire team to make sure that the team coalesces on a strategy that you all agree on. The other part of a business plan is that you're going to wind up setting some milestones to be able to measure whether or not you're executing well. As I've already alluded to, coming up with a good idea is way easier than actually turning that idea into a company. And at the end of the day, if you can't measure it, you can't know whether or not you're being successful. So along the way in your business plan, you're going to set out key criteria and key milestones for the company. And your core team will be able to track how you're doing on that company based on how you're achieving those milestones or objectives or key performance indicators. So any comments to add to that, Alicia?
No, I mean, you're right on the money. You really want to figure out, what product you have and who you're going to sell it to. Exactly, your target economic buyer is, it could be a business, it could be a person. So, we're going to talk about B2B and B2C in here, as well as B2B2C. So just know B2B is business to business, where your company is selling to another company. Business to consumer is B2C. You're selling to the masses, everybody, or a particular niche of people. And then B2B2C is finding a way to take your product that you have right now and sell it to a business, but also get it organically into consumers as well. So, and then knowing that your market is large enough to sustain your business or nonprofit is really, really important before you go and start trying to do that. You don't want to start a company and then find out that, you can only make this much amount of money from it per year, because that's it. That's all the people you can sell to. That's all the people that you can get it to. If you're looking for investment, whether it's a nonprofit or a company, you have to be able to say, these are my numbers. This is who I can get this in the hands of before you start. So that's a really important thing.
So in summary, business plan is for your use. Pitch deck is for other people's use, but they should reflect exactly the same concepts. Okay, the very first section now backing up one more step. There's lots of different outlines for what a business plan and a pitch deck can look like. And so we are using a specific format, which was originally developed by Guy Kawasaki, who was one of the very early people at Apple Computer. Eventually, he founded a seed stage VC called Garage Ventures, and quite frankly got tired of looking at all these pitch decks that wound up being incomplete, had forgotten whole sections, were disorganized, and so it was very difficult to be able to track where all the major sections were, et cetera. So he came up with a standardized format, a standardized outline, which is referred to as the 10-slide deck. You'll also see it online referred to as the 11-slide deck, because some people objected that Guy Kawasaki had forgotten an important slide. So we're going to follow that outline, both for the purposes of the pitch deck and for the purposes of the business plan. The very first thing you present, the very first section of the business plan, which will be the analog of when we talk about the pitch deck as being your elevator pitch. We'll describe that in the future workshop, is what is the vision and mission of your company? What is your value proposition? So here you're trying to, and it's important to kind of separate what a vision statement is and what a mission statement is. What a vision statement is your team's vision of what you want to accomplish. So looking forward into the future, if you are wildly successful, what do you want to accomplish? What does the future state of the world looks like as a result of your having started this company? That vision statement can be enormously complicated to be able to get a team to agree on, because it's a very nuanced thing, but it's a really important thing because it winds up being the driving statement for everything that you're trying to accomplish as part of a team. The mission statement is kind of the more practical side of a vision statement, right? In a mission statement, you're going to describe what the actual business is you're trying to do and how the business's objectives are going to actually accomplish, number one, creating a vision, but number two, eventually instantiating what the vision statement contains. Okay, so again, it's kind of the overarching concept that should drive what your company is. And don't be afraid as a team to really hash these things out to the point where you're really agreed upon it. Because once again, if you're starting a company, there has to be 100% coalition around those concepts. Because one of the things that you'll find when all of you guys go out and you all start your own companies and they all become very successful, one of the things that happens is a very common thing, sometimes very early in a company history, sometimes later when it's more developed. But what you wind up finding is that unless you're really coalesced around exactly the same set of objectives and vision, your team will wind up expending effort in things that defocus them away from that original vision or mission. So effectively, you wind up with a whole bunch of rowers in a cruise shell, and they're not necessarily rowing in the same direction. So again, you will find that in the core team, important to coalesce. As the company develops, even more important to make sure that everyone's bought in to what this vision is, what the company objectives are, so you can make sure that you have a cruise shell that is filled with people that are rowing exactly in time, in exactly the same direction, so you get the greatest impact that you can out of every investment dollar that you make.
Mm-hmm. So once you have your vision and your mission statements down, and you guys are all agreed on that, that's when you're going to later turn that into your elevator pitch. And that's usually just going to sound like, my company XYZ provides this service for these people, and this is why we're different, or this is how this solves their problem. Your differentiator should be something that you guys keep in mind while you're making your vision and value propositions and your mission statements, because it's going to translate to every other piece part of your company strategy. So your product strategy, your go-to-market strategy, every piece part of it will really kind of come together and turn all these pieces of the puzzle into one big picture eventually. So just really keep that in mind. Remember why you're different, what makes you unique, and focus in on that and really make sure that you showcase that to people. That's why they're going to sit at the edge of their chair and say, this is different. Okay, this is interesting. No one's done this before. That's really what you want to be going for, is something that someone hasn't just already created. Do you want to do next slide?
So, so there are about half a dozen ways that companies fail. One of the most common ones is not really understanding what the problem is and how compelling the solution is. In fact, I'm going to relate this to my own personal background. Me and my very best friend in the world went off and we started a company that what they did is they did tracking technology. In other words, you could put a little tag on either a person or a thing, and you could track those objects or people moving through a large space. So it was used in theme parks for child safety. It was used a lot in hospitals for being able to track patients, especially as they move through the OR. It was used in tracking hospital equipment and the like. It was a cool technology, really cool technology. And we assembled a world-class team of engineers to go build this thing. ultimately, and we wound up spending $50 million developing this system and getting it to market. So we ran through a lot of money. But at the end of the day, that the problems that that system solved were not sufficiently compelling for people to actually write a big check. It was typically to install this in, say, an amusement park would have been $500,000 to $1 million. That problem that it was solving to the buyers was not sufficiently compelling to be a need to have versus a want to have. So it is important to make sure that you state the problem that you're trying to solve crisply, but you also, through particularly through primary research, but also secondary resource, establish how compelling a solution to that problem would be to a prospective buyer.
Mm-hmm. And you can do that by finding who you think your target economic buyer would be and interviewing them. So you can do email outreaches to get to people. You can call them up. You can go on LinkedIn. Just try and find that target economic buyer and find out how big of a problem is this. Is this a nice to have, which is okay, or is this a need to have, something like Advil? Like when you have that headache, you absolutely need it. I think that's just so important when you're starting a company, is really, really focusing in on that problem and if it's something that does need to be solved.
Okay, the next thing that you need to do is to size the market. So when you start a company, you need to make sure that the market that you're trying to solve, the problem that you're trying to solve represents a market that is large enough to sustain your business. And there are two levels of sustaining a business. The first level is that you start a company that will that serves a large enough market to be able to sustain your company for your own purposes. So that's typically referred to as a lifestyle business. And the vast majority of businesses in the United States, I would guess something on the order of 98, 99% of them are in one way or another, let's use this term lifestyle business loosely. It's a small company that provides enough income to be able to pay for the employees, pay for the overhead, and pay for the founder's income. And that's enough. And that is a perfectly viable path, and it has lots of advantages to it, not the least of which is there are no outside investors.
Mm-hmm. And these companies can actually be quite large. I've seen lifestyle companies that are throwing off $3-4 million, and that's great. They bootstrapped it, and bootstrapping, by the way, is just starting a company and doing it in a really lean way in which you're not taking out outside investment. So you're just continuing to grow the company a little bit slower, but you're not giving up equity in exchange.
So now, as you could probably guess, there are some companies that get to be pretty big, in fact, get to be huge, being still lifestyle businesses, and they're very tightly controlled. My own current, actually both of the companies that I'm CEO of, one is younger. The more mature one employs hundreds of people. There are no outside investors. And in some sense, it is a lifestyle business for a group of 3 founders. However, we chose that we like having a great degree of control. So that was a quality of life decision made for us. The other kind of company is one that has investors in it. So as soon as you go to investors, as soon as you require having investors, that changes the whole character of the company, because the key difference is that if an investor is putting in money into your company, they're going to expect to get that money back plus some profit. They're going to expect to make some money as a result of having invested in your company. So as soon as you do that, that means by definition, your company has what's referred to as an exit. So typically that exit is the intention that you're going to eventually sell that company or take that company public for the purposes of making the investment ownership that exists in that company be liquid for the purposes of the investors and the founders. So as soon as you get into requiring investors, by definition, it has to be a market that is big enough to be able to have an investment return. It has to be in a segment that has a lot of acquisitions that are happening. It has to be fast growing enough to be able to command a good premium when it does exit, et cetera. And finally, in the process of selling a portion of your company in the form of investment, that also means that you're giving up control. And eventually you will give up through investment, you'll give up majority stake and therefore lose absolute control in the company. So it is a huge, it's a huge path. That decision to be able to bring on investors or not, both of them, as we're mentioning, have their plus and minus. But certainly, if you go down the investor path, then it's really important to be able to make sure that when you're doing the target market and opportunity, that those numbers jive with having investment returns.
And that, again, that's not every company, especially if you're building a social impact nonprofit. Those aren't going to typically be as much of a concern. You can raise money through ways in order to fund that. And then Arnav has a question. Is it that the problem that we potentially solve leads to a big check? Is that for personal gain or to sustain the company? And it depends on what problem you're solving and what your goals are to get out of this. If your idea is to have a big exit and, $50 million and take your piece and go, then that's important. That you have a problem that people are willing to write checks for. The check doesn't necessarily have to be big. It doesn't have to be like Armando's company Pinpoint, where an amusement park would have to look at spending $500,000 to $1 million to outfit themselves with that product that solves their issue. It could be something that you sell for $10 and you could make a really great company off of it. It doesn't have to be a big check. I think what we're really trying to hone in here is that you are solving a problem with your product or service that people will actually write that check for, whether it's a $10 check or whether it's $1 million check that you're asking of them.
And it is also important to kind of realize that we use the term social impact. Keep in mind that most social impact companies are for profit, right? Social impact and nonprofit aren't necessarily interchangeable concepts, right? So you think about all of the social impact stuff happening in the healthcare world. Look at Professor Ayers. At the opening ceremony, you're gonna listen to Professor Hugh Hare, who's with the MIT Media Lab, and as Alicia alluded to, he was an extreme sports guy in his youth, a mountain climber, got into an unfortunate mountain climbing accident where he lost both legs to frostbite, and then dedicated his life to be able to come up with prosthesis that would be the equivalent full function of normal legs. And he was very successful, and he wound up developing the Biome system for leg prosthetics. The Biome system was a for-profit company that was sold very successfully. Mm-hmm. And so there was a case where Professor Ayer did well. He got an exit out of it. And so he did financially well, but he also contributed to society in a way that you can't possibly argue that what he invented is something that's impacting an awful lot of people in an important way.
Well, and then the second part of the question, I did forget to answer that. So I apologize, but is that for personal gain or to sustain the company, that big check that we're talking about? It's for the gain of the company to show revenue, really, traction, that's important, but really it will help to sustain the company and to help you put money back in to be able to market and grow and pay employees and hire new ones. So you do have to think about, if you are selling a product for $10, is that enough? Or can you sell enough of that to be able to hire new people and scale your company and get it really growing and successful?
And again, it's very, it's easy to be able to kind of separate for-profit and nonprofit companies, but in a nonprofit, you have exactly the same set of problems. Your target economic buyer typically changes because typically in a nonprofit, your target economic buyer is that you're looking for grants. You're looking for grant money. So you have to have a compelling problem that you're solving. Only in this case, instead of selling a product to the consumer of the product, you're selling to foundations a solution to a problem that is a need to have and not a like to have. So it's all the same concepts exist. And yes, you do have to have a large enough market and a compelling enough problem that you're solving to be able to sustain the company and to be able to not just sustain the founders of the company in their own lifestyle, but also the eventual employees of that company that will be employees of this nonprofit. So you do have all the same issues about being a company that is sustainable in and of itself, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit.
All right.
Move on?
On this side? Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, let's head on to the next one. Go to market strategy.
So this was a hard one. Alicia already made allusions to the fact that right up front, you need to decide who it is that you're actually selling to. If you are a business selling to businesses, that's referred to as a B2B company. So in that business that you're selling to, whatever the solution is, you have to be able to identify who the buyer would be. Now, let's go back to Professor Ayer as an example. In his case, he developed and manufactured these leg prostheses. For him, so ultimately his customer is that amputee that would need this prosthesis. But that is a very, very hard task to be able to reach out through marketing to all of those amputees that exist in the world. That's a huge marketing proposition. So instead, what Professor Ayer did is he focused on distributors. So companies that that sold all sorts of prostheses of all various types to people that had that were arm amputees, leg amputees, etc. And it was very easy for him to identify who the distributors of those sorts of products were. So he focused his business, focused on selling to distributors, other businesses, and those businesses knew who the amputees were and how to reach them, knew who the doctors were in their local region, etc. So that is called a B2B2C company. So business to business to consumer company. So, so in some cases, I'm a business selling to another business where the actual buyer resides within that business. In other cases, I'm selling through an intermediary business on my way to getting to the eventual economic buyer. And in some cases, in consumer companies, I am selling directly to that consumer. I mean, go on any number of websites that are selling everything from beauty aids through mattresses, through any number of products. And you'll see websites. Just this morning, I wound up buying some single source fancy chocolate because my kids like chocolate through a website portal directly with that company. That was a B2C company. So that Burdick chocolate is selling directly to its consumers. This morning, I happened to be a consumer of those chocolate bars. So you'll need to decide what kind of company it is. You'll need to be able to decide how you can get to that eventual buyer. And all of that gets wrapped into what is your go-to-market strategy. How are you actually, once you have that product finished, how are you going to actually reach from you out to the eventual target economic buyer for your product? And that can be, depending on the product, very, very complex.
And there are lots of different combinations that you can do. You could do a B2C company where you're selling chocolate directly to Armando, or you can do a B2B company where you're selling that chocolate to grocery stores, or you're selling that chocolate and white labeling it for other people, etc. And then it gets to C. So that would be B2B to C, but you're selling to businesses there instead of consumers. When you sell to consumers, it is really hard to get to 1 million people if that's your target economic buyer, right? If you sell B2B to C, you're focusing on businesses that already have contacts with those consumers. That's oftentimes easier. There's going to be a smaller pool and you're going to get to those people just the same, but it's going to take less time and effort because you're selling now to a business who's going to offer that product or service to their consumers. If you look at B2E, that would be business to enterprise sales. That can be a really great thing. You can have most of the times the products that you're selling or the services you're selling are very expensive when you're going B2E. And that's because you don't really want to go B2E with a smaller product because the sales cycle is so long. A large company, corporation, or organization is going to be very bureaucratic, and it'll be very difficult to get to the top and to actually get them to move. Because even though one of the VPs or one of the C-suite executives is interested in this product, to actually get on board and get moving with that and getting it sold and having them write you a check, that process can be very long. Same thing with government agencies, municipals, all kinds of, government and schools. Those tend to be really difficult to get into because they are so bureaucratic. When you look at B2B, which would be like a small to medium-sized business, it tends to be much easier to get to the top person and have them make a decision quickly in order to get that sales cycle on the road. So those are some things you want to take into consideration as well. So if you are going to consumers, but you can find a way to sell your product to companies instead, businesses instead, to get to those consumers, that might be the smarter way to go.
In any event, this is something that requires, you're putting a lot of thought into exactly how you're going to get to that buyer. So be careful and really methodical about this. Spend the time to do the research, the primary research, actually calling up target economic buyers, describing the product, seeing how receptive they are to it, testing, pricing, things like that. Okay, so revenue model. So depending on the product, obviously at the end of the day, you have to produce a product for some amount of money, taking into account the cost of the product, taking into account the cost of operating, the cost of your employees, all those costs factored in. And then there has to be some money left over. Has to be some profit to be able to run the company, or in the case of nonprofit, some money left over that gets pumped back into the operations to allow the organization to grow. So there's lots of different revenue models depending on what the product is. In the case of a hard good, let's say you're making shampoo. Well, that shampoo, actually, let's use Professor Ayer's example again. One revenue model for Professor Ayer could be to say that those, I don't know how much those leg prostheses cost. I suspect they are very, very expensive, tens of thousands of dollars, right? So one model would be that he is selling directly to the consumers and then allowing the consumer to interact with the insurance companies to be able to cover the cost. But what he's trying to do is a one-time sale. Let's suppose that these prostheses are $50,000. The consumer needs he is selling a set of prostheses for $50,000 to a consumer. Another way that he could do is he could do it on some kind of lease model. So the consumer says, I'm going to use this pair of legs for the next 10 years. And so I'm going to pay a fixed monthly cost every month, which is going to be a lot less daunting than the $50,000, especially if insurance won't pick it up. So there are various models for how you provide the product to the customer, whether it's a one-time revenue, whether it's a model where you're paying monthly, whether or not you pay for the product initially, but there's ongoing maintenance and support costs, et cetera. You need to factor all those decisions into how you're going to provide it in a way that it is affordable for the customer. Because at the end of the day, even if it is a compelling product, if your target customer cannot buy it because it's too expensive, you have a problem. So you have to come up with creative ways to be able to address that issue. Now, there are various, in the last talk that was given, that Alenka gave, she introduced the term key performance indicators. And so we've already made reference to, there's various milestones that companies typically achieve that are used as kind of measuring sticks for a company's progress. Well, there's also some additional indicators of how you're performing that are important. And every business has different key performance indicators that are specific to the product and the market you're doing. However, some basic ones, absolute basic ones, are how much does it cost to acquire a customer? If getting to that target economic, let's suppose that I know who my target economic buyer is, and I'm selling a product for $1,000 to him. If it costs me in sales and marketing costs, it costs me $1,500 to get to that target economic buyer, I don't have a business. It costs me more to reach that person in terms of sales and marketing than I actually make from the product. So that's a non-starter. So it's important to be able to factor in, all right, what are all my costs associated to be able to get a new customer? And that's referred to as a CAC. The next one is, let's suppose that I sell to a customer a subscription model like I described with those prostheses. I'm paying a monthly fee. And in this case, I gave the example of 10 years. Well, I need to be able to calculate, well, how much money will I make over time, over the entire lifetime of my relationship with that customer? How much money will I actually make? So what is the revenue that that customer will provide me over time? In the case of this leg prosthesis I gave you as an example, let's suppose that those prostheses do last a whole 10 years without replacing. Then I can figure out that the lifetime value of that customer is those monthly payments spread over 120 payments over that 10-year period. And that allows me to be able to calculate what is the ultimate revenue that I get from each customer. And that obviously is a factor in determining whether or not you have something viable relative to my original cost to acquire a customer or my CAC. Part of what you need to factor into that equation is that maybe, even though you have a customer that picked up those prostheses for 10 years, they signed a contract that they're going to be every month paying for 10 years. Maybe after 5 years, they're not satisfied with the product, or new technology gets introduced, et cetera. And after 10 years, they drop off. Some percentage of those customers drop off. That's referred to as the customer attrition rate. So you have to factor in that the lifetime value is affected by the attrition rate, because not 100% of those buyers in this example of these prostheses will have made it through all 10 years. Some percentage will have dropped off. You need to factor that in and then again measure that against your CAC. Anything to add here, Alicia?
No, yeah, just whether that's a product that they've bought and refunded, or whether that's a monthly subscription service that you offer, or any other kind of consulting service, or anything that you do, you're going to have some kind of attrition rate. If it's an app on a phone, whatever it is, it's difficult to find these KPIs until you're actually out there talking to people and starting to sell. So it's just something that you want to keep in mind, though, when you're creating your company strategy and your go-to-market strategy, to make sure you're creating a revenue that's in line and sustainable with your go-to-market strategy.
In fact, as an example, let's suppose that you've decided to make this a B2C company, and you're going to rely on social media and advertising as your primary vehicle to be able to get the word out. There's a whole bunch of KPIs about how many people actually looked at the ad and actually watched if it was a YouTube ad, how many of them actually watched the ad all the way through, how many of them clicked through, what kind of volume am I getting on my YouTube postings, am I creating a channel that has a lot of subscribers, and how is that subscriber population growing? So there's all kinds of KPIs, once again, that are specific to your business and your style of sales and marketing distribution. You need to establish what they are and then track them aggressively. The best CEOs, in lots of cases, especially for the online stuff, the data is available on a daily basis, hourly basis, minute by minute basis. Some CEOs I've actually seen where they actually track these minute by minute to see how they're doing it at any given moment of time against their plan. So you can become very focused in measuring all of these KPIs in your company such that you know that you're tracking against what your long-term objectives are.
Yeah, as long as it's, again, not defocusing you. But actually, if we can run back really quick to the go-to-market strategy, there was something that I did want to mention, and that's focus. So when you create a go-to-market strategy, oftentimes when you create a product or a service, you'll have multiple markets that you could possibly sell to. This product could work for this group of people, this group of people, this group of people, and this group of people. So which ones are we going to go after? And you should not say all 4 or all 10 or all 20, right? You should find your first head pin, is what we like to call it in the industry, your initial go-to-market, and focus on that one first. And so the way I explain this to entrepreneurs that I work with, when they say, oh, but I only have to change X, Y, and Z to make it good for this other market, and then this other market needs this solution as well, and I just have to change X, Y, Z. It doesn't make sense. Imagine your capital and your human resources, your employees and yourself and your team. That's what you have right here in your hand. This is fertilizer, okay? And you've got a square mile of land, and you're trying to grow grass on it. Well, you lay the seed down, and if you just take this little bit of fertilizer, if you have 1 gallon of it, and that's all your resources for your company, and you try to just spray a gallon of fertilizer over a square mile, you're probably not going to get anything, right? You're not going to get much traction. You may get little patches here, little patches here, but it's not going to make sense. What you want to do is pile that fertilizer, your focus, your resources, your HR, you want to, in your capital, on that one little square patch that you've designated for yourself, and then grow it out from there and expand to other markets. And that way you're putting all your focus and energy into one. And Armando brought up Pinpoint that he did with his best friend years and years and years ago. And he learned the hard way that you don't want to do that. And I love that story because your failures help you to learn so much about company building and creating a good, successful, sustainable company. I can't even tell you enough. Just don't be afraid of your failures. Just keep going and learn from them. But that's what Armando and Ron had to learn the hard way. is they tried to focus on how many, like 10, 12 different markets at one time.
Right.
Yeah. And so they went through $50 million worth of capital trying to make 12 different markets happy. Let's pick one initially, and then you can have future additional paths to other markets lined up in and you can share that on your pitch deck. You can share that in your business plan. After we nail down this market and get really great traction, we've got some revenue and we're, showing that we can actually do this, that the dogs are eating the dog food, right? They're using their product and liking it. Then you can start branching out into other markets. But I did want to mention that focus is really, really important.
As Olenka said the other day, I can't believe I've never heard this one before, but I'm going to use it from now on. Riches are in the niches. I thought that was great.
Sorry, that's just something I want to say. We got off topic, so.
Okay, so you guys are starting from scratch, right? You're doing initial business idea. So you're not going to have a lot in the way of established traction. However, because all of you guys are going to start successful companies, that company is going to develop over time, and you're going to achieve various milestones. You're going to achieve pre-seed funding. You're going to achieve product development and release. You're going to achieve your first pilots. You're going to achieve your first revenue, etc. All those various milestones, and there's a sequence of milestones that companies tend to hit that in general are common to most companies. Investors, and for that matter, for your own sakes, you're going to want to see how your progress against those milestones are. And in later pitches and business plans, you're going to want to highlight how many of those milestones have been achieved. And the reason for that is the more of those milestones have been achieved, the more established the company is, the less risky the investment is, the more it's a real company, a real ongoing viable company. So this is not a slide that applies to each of you right now because you're at the concept stage, but eventually will apply because once again, all of you guys are going to start interesting companies. They'll be meaningful and will have traction.
Right. But although I've talked to some of the teams and some people actually have started nonprofits and are starting to, take that idea that they've already started forming and bring that here and translate that into a company or a profit officially. And congrats for doing that groundwork. A lot of you have product and or market validation, right? So market validation is you being able to point to use cases and examples saying, this person, I sold to this person, they were really happy. Here's a reference from them. Or I told this person about the idea and they were right in my market. And they said, if I can create this product that I sold them on and come back to them, they will buy it if it fulfills X, Y, and Z requirements for them. So that would be product and market validation. And those are things that some of you actually may have. So you want to write those down in your business and point to them and say, when I first started, I had 2 customers and now I have 10 customers. This is how I did it, etc. Those are really, really compelling things. They're things that investors especially want to see, or people who are going to donate or start to fund your nonprofit. That's what they will see, is that proven out. My market does want it. The dogs will eat dog food and they will purchase this. So make sure if you do have that you write it down.
That is a good point. Yes, absolutely. There's market validation in whatever primary research you do, even at this stage. So absolutely include that. And my bad for not including that in my initial description.
Well, some people are starting from scratch, and if you can get some market validation, that's going to get you more points, I think, on the judge criteria as well. So, and even if you are starting from scratch, you can reach out to your target economic buyers or your markets and try and get some, at least, market validation.
Yeah, we are encouraging everyone. Once again, it's very easy to come up with a compelling, what sounds on the surface like a compelling idea, But until you do the research, you don't really know. You never know what the gotcha is going to be once you actually test the idea with people that actually would be willing to buy it or use it. So we're encouraging everyone here to go do some research on their ideas before they finalize them.
And talk to your mentors about that. By the way, a few teams haven't responded to getting their mentors set up. So make sure you do that. Even if you don't have an idea yet, they can help you try and formulate or hone in on what you might want to do or are interested in doing. So make sure you sign up with that. But your mentors can also talk to you about LOIs, letters of intent, which we kind of touched on. It's going to your target economic buyer or your market and saying, if I can build XYZ product, will you sign paper saying that you'll buy it? And then there's also, so just talk to them about all the options there for you to be able to actually create tangible validation.
Management team. Okay, so it almost never happens that right from the start, the core team that you've assembled to start your company has every skill that you're going to need. So in a core team, you're going to need to have people that are good on the technology side. You're going to have to, on the product part of it, you're going to have people that are good on the sales side of it, the marketing side of it, the finance side of it. And that's unlikely that in your initial seed of a core team, you'll have all of those relevant experiences already represented. So it's important for you to recognize where your strengths are, but also where your weaknesses are as a core team, and then describe which roles, what skill set you really need to augment, and how that needs to be converted into critical roles that you're going to have to identify people to help you. Similarly, it is important to be able to have outside advisory groups that have domain expertise that can be an adjunct resource to the actual team that's working day to day on the company. So we really encourage right from the start to be able to identify people that are key advisors. So if it's a technology, let's use Professor Ayer's example. In his case, he probably had the technology side pretty well down. However, he probably needed to augment his advisory board with people that had relationships in the prosthetics industry, in that distribution channel, that could advise him on how he could build a sales and marketing channel.
Mm-hmm. Or on
probably already very strong on the technology side. So it's where the gaps are.
Right. And if you are in that situation where you've got a product or technology, but you're not quite sure what market to put it in, then you're going to want to find an advisor who could help you with that. Or if he knows I want to sell to distributors, and you know someone who has done that and sold to those kind of distributors in the past, bring them on as an advisor and ask them for, their advice on how they would do it and how they manage or did or would do what you're trying to achieve.
Now, what is the difference between an advisory board and a board of directors position? The difference is the board of directors has fiduciary responsibility. So it is a completely different level of commitment because now they are legally obligated to the investors to represent the interests of the company and the investors. And it's a very complex path when the interests of the company and the interests of the investors are not aligned. So generally speaking, boards of directors don't necessarily need to be formed until you actually have investors, and in some cases, until you have very large investors involved, where they will mandate that you have a board of directors be formed for the purposes of giving oversight. Boards of directors, so if each of your companies develop to the point where you're successful enough that you're now going to go out for big money, you're going to go raise $5, $10 million, $15 million, you're likely going to go to venture capital firms. And venture capital firms are firms that invest other people's money into young startup companies. And those investors, those venture capital firms, will insist on the formation of a formalized board and will insist that be personally represented, personally meaning their firm, on behalf of their investors, be represented in a board of directors. So for this purpose, for your purposes, board of directors comes way later and only when you're out there getting pretty large outside investment. Any other comments on this?
Nope.
Okay, financials. There are two purposes to doing financials. Actually, let me start off something. When you're just starting a company, it's very, very, very hard to even guess what your financials are going to actually be, how fast you're going to sell, how short or long your sales cycle is. You're going to be at best guessing. However, any investor, and for your own purposes, you want to make the most educated guess that you can possibly make, taking into all the factors about your market, your product, your ability to manufacture the product, all of these various factors in as thought through ways you possibly can. In particular, to demonstrate to your investors that you know what you're talking about. So the investors won't necessarily look at every single penny that's in that financial plan, but they're really going to want to know what your assumptions are and how you drove to those assumptions and whether or not you're really thinking it through on what the financials of this company are. However, there's a second purpose for financials, which is really important, and that is, what is your short-term cash needs? Because the last thing number one, you're going to have to figure out how much money you're going to need to go raise. And that can only be based on how quickly you're going to burn through cash. So you need to know what your capital requirements are. And also, importantly, when your out of cash date is. In other words, if I raise no more money beyond what I have, when do I run out of money? So I can figure out how to, because sometime before that date, I got to go raise more money, either through revenue by selling my product, through grants in the case of a nonprofit, or through raising external cash through investors or, quite frankly, through your own pocketbooks. So one purpose is for investor purposes to validate that you know what you're talking about. The second one is to figure out your cash flows. Any other comments on that one?
No, the financials can be difficult, you guys. I mean, for an early stage technology company, it's going to be pretty simple, or an early stage nonprofit, it's going to be pretty simple right now. But if you haven't done financials before, that's okay. We have a mentor session coming up on financials specifically, so we can help you out with that. They can be daunting if you know how to read them. So. And
by the way, John on this call is a financials expert. So he's a great resource.
That's really great.
Yeah, I can read a profit and loss statement. I can barely look at a balance sheet. I'm certainly not a financial expert.
What was that, John? Were you going to come
in? I said I'll be doing it with Mark Allen, who's with USAA in finance and was with General Motors in finance. So Mark and I will do a presentation together on that.
Perfect. All right, competitive analysis.
Okay, so it's great if you invent a product, but if it turns out that there's already better products out there, you probably don't have a real business. So it is important to figure out how your product, your solution stacks up against all of the competitive offerings in terms of price, in terms of functionality, in terms of technology, and all the various aspects of figuring out how that product fits within a competitive landscape. Part of that also is figuring out what the barriers to entry are. So not just looking at competition in terms of what is already out there in the market, but also looking at how easy would it be for somebody to just copy me. And if there is not a lot of barrier to entry, it doesn't cost very much money to be able to replicate exactly the same thing, you will always be under threat that other people will come into the market with your idea and undercut you. Now, there's only the two most common forms of barriers to entry are, number one, intellectual property. Okay, intellectual property is a broad statement, but the most common way that people refer to it in terms of patents. Okay, so if I have a novel idea for a novel product, I can go out and file with the Patent and Trade Office, which gives me a very long runway for having that idea protected. So that's a huge barrier to entry on the assumption that you do have a defensible patent. Because once again, it has to be novel, has to be original. The Patent Office actually has to grant it because it's novel and original.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're probably not going to do a whole lot on patents here since we're not going to actually file them. But if you look at nonprofits as well, you know, you don't want to start a nonprofit or social cause company and realize that someone's already doing that, even if it is a not-for-profit. If there's, you know, you don't want to start a Red Cross if there's a Red Cross already. There's just really no need for it. You have to understand and really hone in on what your differentiator is, just like we talked about earlier. Your differentiators are what makes your company exciting, and that's what makes your target economic buyer want to buy it, or someone to donate or invest in your company or your nonprofit. So I think that's just, you know, the biggest thing is if a company is already doing something similar, but you just kind of found a really great add-on to that, that may not be a good idea to do for a company, especially if it's something in technology where people can move pretty quickly. You just want to consider who's already in the landscape and will they see my product and then just decide to make it themselves versus buying it from me or purchasing my whole company, acquiring your company.
Now, the first one that we talked about is intellectual property as a barrier to entry. The second one we talked about is Red Cross is a great example. If a company is so established in the market that really prevents, regardless of intellectual property, it makes it really hard for somebody else to enter it. So, and in kind of, for this oversimplifying the term, that's generally referred to as first mover advantage. In other words, the first person that came to the market and has already established itself, it already dominates that space, is already there. That's a great prevention from somebody else entering. So I won't start a new Red Cross because Red Cross has a huge first mover advantage. I don't know, about 150 years worth of first mover advantage. They're already well established in the market. Just the same way that no one else is starting, or it would be very difficult to start a Facebook clone because Facebook is so established at having the first mover advantage. Okay, so once again, when you're looking at competitive analysis, you need to look at existing products, but also look at barriers to entry for future competitors and how do you stave them off from coming in later in the market.
Next slide.
So last section of the business plan, and this assumes that this is an investor deck, which if you're not out there or a business plan that's needing investment, So when you came up with your cash flow analysis, part of your financials, you will have determined that, geez, to be able to bring this product to market, I'm going to need whatever it is, $1,000. So that is the amount that I'm looking for. So in this last section, you have to describe what it is you're raising, how you're planning on using that $1,000, and what you're actually going to achieve with it. So the assumption isn't that $1,000 is going to be enough money that the company's ever going to need, but rather $1,000 is going to be enough to get it to a next significant milestone. For example, getting your product done and into the market.
And revenues. And that actually goes for nonprofits as well. When you're starting your nonprofit, if you do want to hire people on and start to go out and make some changes, a lot of you will need donations in order to make this nonprofit a thing, a real functioning organization. And so instead of saying investment for equity, a lot of times what you're going to be doing is doing a fundraise. So if you need $10,000 to be able to create your product or your service or your social cause, then you need to say, okay, $10,000, this is what it's going to be used for. And you still need to show the people that you're asking money for what you're going to use it for, whether it's for profit or not.
Can I make something here?
Mm-hmm. Please.
One of the things that in the social impact sector is a lot of times you create a partnership with, like you may have a for-profit product or service you created, but you partner with a nonprofit that services that niche sector. So it's kind of like the distributor model, but in many cases, they sort of provide the capital because you're providing the initial prototypes and they're testing it with their clientele. Let's say it's a nonprofit for autism and you've developed a product that's geared for autism. In many cases, the person that's creating that product will partner with an agency that specializes with autistic persons.
Absolutely. Yeah, partnerships are always something that you want to take advantage of if you can. If you guys can benefit each other and it's a win-win situation, absolutely.
But once again, between nonprofit and for-profit, there are analogs between, I'm out there trying to raise funds for the sake of investors, I have to create a credible reason why me, why now, right? What is the problem I'm solving? But in exactly the same way, if you're a nonprofit that's seeking either donations, GoFundMe campaign, or I'm seeking grant money from a foundation, you still have to answer the same question of why me, why now, and how's the money going to get used? So it's exactly the same problem, whether it's a for-profit or nonprofit company. You need certain funds to get going, and you have to be credible enough that people are going to give you those funds. Okay, so here's some links, and Alicia, I guess we're distributing copies of this presentation to everyone so they can follow these links.
Okay.
I included here one interesting article, How to Write a Perfect Business Plan. It's from an Inc. magazine article. It's well worth a read. It doesn't exactly follow this format exactly, but I think you can kind of fill in the blanks. The general concepts will wind up being the same regardless of the order of these sections that we're doing here. In addition to that, there's some great YouTube videos that you can go pursue. There's 3 different links there. By all means, go watch those videos. I think they're worthwhile and you'll enjoy watching them. And then finally, one of the things that's easy to overlook is the fact that in general, entrepreneurship is really something that is most pursued by people that are younger. In general, people my age are not first-time entrepreneurs. They just aren't. They are generally, for example, for me, when I was off starting companies on kind of successive companies, and I was much more involved in kind of the actual starting of companies with me as an operator, it was when I was in my 20s and my 30s. Okay, lots of cases. I gave this example of the MIT 100K $100K business plan competition, which is one of the granddaddy business plan competitions. That, generally speaking, that is a class that is taken at MIT by, generally speaking, people that are 20 years old. So people that are a few years older, 3, 4, 5 years older than you guys are. And yet that class, that business plan competition, has already generated companies that have an aggregate value of $15 billion. And these are all being done by companies that are, by people that are just slightly older than you guys are. Not only that, there's a number of great companies that have been started by high school entrepreneurs, people exactly the same age as you guys are. So by all means, there's never a time that is, if you're passionate enough and you're driven enough and you want it enough, there's no reason why you shouldn't start your social impact company now. So go for it.
A social impact for-profit company affect the focus of that social impact? I'm worried that profit aspect would become something that overwhelms the humanitarian effects of the business. And I think that it just really depends. There are a lot of for-profit companies that do really great things. You can look at Palm Shoes, where you buy a pair of shoes and they give a pair of shoes to someone in need. They do that with socks. They do that with food, all kinds of things. So making a profit, so doing well by doing good can happen. It doesn't have to be one or the other. I think that for some issues, some topics, it might be a little touchy, but again, just reach out to me, reach out to your mentors, John, Armando, anyone, and we're happy to kind of help you work through your thoughts on that. And
yeah, this is a complicated topic because for-profit versus nonprofit is, to me, is a tactical decision. And it has to do with what your available funding sources are and what the requirements are to bring that to market, right?
well,
So for example,
buyer is
Biome, Professor Ayer's product, required way too much investment to have been done as a nonprofit. Did it provide a social good? Absolutely it did. However, if I was starting a nonprofit, I have an idea that I know what the access to funding is through foundations and grant money, why wouldn't I do that as a nonprofit? So it's a tactical decision that has a lot to do with what level of control you want in the business, what kind of focus you want in the business, and what are the available funding vehicles for the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for me, I look at a business as a holistic and a nonprofit as a holistic entity. And so for me, that also ties in a little bit with product, market, go-to-market strategies, all of those kinds of things. You could even do a combination, honestly, of nonprofit and for-profit. So there's all kinds of things that you can do. That is a very vague and wide-stretching answer. So again, all the co-directors are available. Your mentors are available as well to help you kind of work through your specific questions related to your company.
And I'll touch on that briefly, and I'll give a very specific example because going back to what Armando stressed about solving a problem, a lot of times you solve a problem in a different way. And a good successful model of a student-run program is Teach for America. Teach for America was basically placing teachers in low-income, underserved neighborhoods. There were all these educational schools throughout the country that were, if you will, trying to do the same thing, but were not being very successful. So a Princeton undergraduate developed a concept that they would develop a specific training. She would bring in some matching resources that they would commit to a 2-year guarantee in a low-income neighborhood. In fact, for those of you who are in Phoenix Union School District, which is the primary high school district in the state, the superintendent, Chad Geston, was a Teach for America. He and his wife in 2001 came to Phoenix to work in the Roosevelt low-income neighborhood school district. And from that, Chad evolved to eventually becoming the superintendent of the whole school district. And, but that was sort of a niche program where they solved a problem. And as Armando referred to, nonprofits and foundations and other groups wanted to help them solve. And they were technically solving a problem that was underserved, but other people were trying to solve it. And they just did a better job of placing people in low income. In fact, in their case, they took people from liberal arts programs, were not education majors, and created a specialized training program solely for low income neighborhoods. Anyways, and that's, I'm going to be doing a session related to collaborative partnerships and different things. And that's one of the aspects, even though social impact may have lower profit opportunities, there's a lot of opportunities to create collaborative partnerships, particularly if you solve it in a better way. And that's identical, as Armando referred to, in the for-profit and nonprofit. Both want to solve a problem in a very creative, innovative way.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, it looks like we don't have any more questions, but the ones that we did get were really great. You guys, thank you again, and I will follow up with an email with the Dropbox link for the slides for you guys. Remember, the 10th, we've got the workshop. The 11th is the opening ceremony. That's where Professor Hare is going to be speaking, as well as Jamie Kasip of Google, one of their chief education evangelist. So I am looking forward to seeing you guys all there. Remember to invite your family and friends. They can register at the website, just www.azsibc.org. And again, anyone can register for free to attend the opening and closing ceremonies and get that Zoom link. So, all right. Well, thank you guys and take care. In the meantime, I'm looking forward to talking with you guys soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.